I'm Nicholas Penrake, and you're listening to A Trader's Life, the podcast where I get to talk to successful traders about their approach to trading, how they started out and went from broke or breaking even to pulling in thousands of dollars a week. Trading is a tough game. They say only around 5% of those who try actually make a profit. Join me for A Trader's Life to glean some valuable insights from the market wizards I get to talk to. My guest today is Don Yocham, Head of Private Ventures at NICI. 25 years experience in the investment management industry has allowed Don to dive into a broad range of asset classes, strategies, and structures. He's finally honed in on one asset class, cannabis. The ushering in of the new administration at the White House, cannabis is very likely to be legalized in the US, possibly as early as spring this year. Cannabis stocks are primed to soar, Don tells me. Stick around to find out more about this new investment opportunity that's about to pop. Here's our conversation. Hey, Don, how's it going?
Nick, it's great. It's great. Glad to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. Welcome to the show. So, Don, I'm probably going to start by asking you, what kind of a trader are you? Because I know you're more than just a trader. You're an investor and you write about investment, you advise on investment. In terms of trading, where would you put yourself? Swing trader?
No, I am really more of a fundamental guy. So, I look for, the underlying process that I stick to is economic value add. So I run the companies that I recommend through an economic value add framework. That means that so it's definitely a fundamental approach. It's very similar. It's effectively a discounted cash flow approach, but it really comes down to looking for valuation. Now that doesn't mean you're a value investor. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities in terms of momentum. GARP, that sort of thing. But really, I'm not just trading on price and movement. It's looking for longer term plays and holding those. It's definitely not buy and hold either, right? Because circumstances change. Opportunities present themselves. But what with economic value add, what you're saying is, all right, I am going to, basically it says the financial statements as they come across are complete and total rubbish. They're made for bankers to look for going concerns, and making sure they get paid back. That's the structure of financial statements. And what you do is you completely disassemble them and treat certain expenses as actual capital, and ultimately what you're doing is getting to a point where, all right, what's the true operating revenue and expenses of company, and then how do we? Then you account for all the capital, and then you got to make sure that company is outperforming its cost of capital. So you figure out its capital, you determine the cost of that capital based on the risk of the company, and then you compare that to the operating profits after tax, and if that's at significantly a high enough rate, or improving quarter over quarter, or that's a measure of which companies are actually adding value through their operations, and it's one that can't be manipulated like financial statements. And income, earnings per share, is almost worthless in and of itself, right? So,
is it really? Oh wow!
Well, because there's so many ways to manipulate it, right? You can have improving earnings. That means they're investing less in their business. You can have horrible earnings, but that's because they are spending a lot on marketing or research and development. All of those things are treated as expenses, and they're really capital investments. So it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. On your LinkedIn profile, I read you create and implement compelling investment philosophies. That was quite an interesting phrase, the investment philosophies part of it. Anyway, for me, so give me an example of what that kind of philosophy would be that you work towards.
Yeah, and that's kind of like I would say that's probably the last 10 years is where my focus has been, especially when I got out of the institutional side of it. and was working more on alternative investments. And then I went to wealth managers. Started this CIO started helping them improve their game, and it was really just stocks, bonds, and cash. That was and stocks were U.S. stocks, and that was their asset allocation framework. And so you go from stocks, bonds, and cash, which are pretty limited. There's so many other things you can do to give you a much more robust opportunity set. Certainly, commodities, emerging markets. How do you put how do currencies fit into those things? All of these things can be done by a retail investor if you know how to do it. So it's really broadening out that opportunity set and giving you far more levers, giving real diversification, right? Not
because that's what we're talking about here, isn't it? Diversification.
Yeah, it's those kind of philosophies. Is just how to and the single biggest risk that most investors are unprotected against are inflation risks, right? And so inflation has certainly been muted for a long time. It's understandably not on people's risk horizon, but certainly now that where we're getting, I think that's changing a lot. But making sure that you manage your risks, to your long-term financial health. Inflation is one of the biggest threats, and then from there, giving yourself a much broader tool set of how to take advantage of opportunities.
Yeah. So, what would be an example of taking that into account, i.e., inflation? Because of course, the Fed is putting more money into the economy, and shares are going up, and there's more money washing about. So inevitably, inflation will press upwards, I would have thought. So what sort of countermeasures might you introduce to counter that?
Well, so there's on the fixed income side, there's inflation-linked bonds. Those are directly linked to inflation, and there's lots of alternatives out there to do opportunities out there to do that. On the second side is commodities. Those are have inflation-linked, or commodities have strong inflation protection measures. Now you've got other currencies, cryptocurrencies, and stuff like that should be looked at very closely. And in equities, I mean, equities, a lot of different types of equities have inflation hedging characteristics in them. No doubt. So, certainly the overall market will, they print more money, the market will go up. That's one thing. But there's going to be companies that are much more positioned for that, and that comes down to kind of taking a look at the type of pricing power that they have, what kind of debt they have on their balance sheet. All those things kind of tell you which ones might benefit more from inflation. But right now, I mean, there's where I'm focused now is one of the best ways to do it is just invest in those sectors that are going to move the most, right? So there's that hasn't gone away. We're talking earlier; it was mainly risk management and basic total portfolio management, right? But as far as like specific opportunities, commodities cannabis is probably the best positioned right now to take advantage of as far as where it is in the market cycle. A lot of certain recent developments. I mean, there's just so much money to be made in the U.S. cannabis market right now. So as far as opportunities right now, I think that is where we are.
Not all of my listeners will be aware of the developments with cannabis. Talk us through why it is now such a big opportunity for people to invest in.
Well, so I think I'll just focus on the U.S. Globally, there is a massive opportunity, but right now the immediate opportunity is in the U.S. So, the number one driver is the fact that cannabis. It's $100 billion market in the U.S., but most of that is black market sales, right? So the legal cannabis market is $20 billion. $20 billion in 2020 was how big that market was, how much cannabis was sold legally. And then you look at the gap between that $20 billion and $100 billion. That's the actual demand base. right? That's a huge market to grow into. States there's 43 states that have legalized cannabis one way or the other. Several states have gone recreational, about 13, including the District of Columbia.
Yeah.
Just on that alone, there's tremendous growth in those markets. Taking those black market sales onto the legal market. Moving that $20 million going to $100 million. We're talking 40-50% revenue growth rate to take over that market in 5 years. I think now we'll actually get there sooner based on the recent election results and the political mood. But that's the number one opportunity is capturing all those sales. Now the other part of that is all the eyes now looking at this market because they see that growth, but they've been kind of kept on the sidelines. All the capital kept on the sidelines because of it's still an illegal substance on the federal level. But you are seeing massive deals starting to get done, and there's just acquisitions going on within the sector because there's a lot of, like with any new sector, you're going to have a lot of would-be cannabis companies, that really aren't up to snuff, but they've got the infrastructure in place, and then you've got a handful, slightly more very dominant players that run really clean operations that do a great job of generating value for investors. And they're just in absolute. They've got tons of cash. They can go out there and acquire companies for 1 to 2 times revenue, and then that revenue goes to a much higher. It's accretive in that 7 times revenue. Is what we're looking at, and that'll continue to go higher. So they can grow their top line massively simply through acquisitions, and then plus the organic growth of the market. That just happens through legalization as it becomes from medical to recreational. Now, very, very possibly, we're looking at federal legalization sometime over the next few months because the Democrats have control of the Senate. And with that, there's a MORE Act, the MORE Act, which was passed by the House in February. I suspect that's going to be passed very soon. Kamala Harris is the co-signer of the bill, one of the authors of the bill, I mean. And, there's just almost nothing standing in the way of that getting passed very soon. And that deschedules cannabis, that means it's no longer a legal or federally controlled substance. And then so much opportunity opens up almost immediately. And that $100 billion market that I mentioned, which is just a start, right? That's not talking about the growth. That's not talking about other sectors at development. That's not talking about new cannabis users, all the people in college that haven't really used it over the over the last 20 years. It becomes a recreational product just like beer, and it just absolutely goes gangbusters. So getting from $20 billion to $100 billion in a couple year time, is that is doubling every few months. That's a massive growth rate.
Yeah. And what do you look for? Because you write about these producers of cannabis, don't you, and stocks and so on. What do you look for in companies in terms of profiles, as to what is up and coming and likely to break out in the next 6 months, especially if this bill goes through?
Right now I'm focusing on what we call multi-state operators. Those are, anybody selling cannabis to an American consumer. That's not, I'm not talking about ones providing services like extractors or selling packaging, that sort of thing. I'm talking about companies owning the dispensaries that are closest to the customer and building that relationship.
Yeah.
And so so they're plant touching is what they're considered. And with those, I look to primarily the ones that are demonstrating continual improvement quarter after quarter in their basically their economic value add, like I talked about before. It doesn't necessarily have to be positive, right? A lot of these companies invested heavily to take advantage of the opportunity, right? And now they have to grow into that.
Yeah.
But so what you're able to see now is the difference between the companies that are adding value, that are improving their, in one sense, it's the same conversation as saying, hey, they're getting cash flow positive, EBITDA, but the metrics are just a little bit different. But the ones that have continually improving operating performance, that are growing into their overhead, their sales, general, and administrative expenses, the ones that are growing into their expense base because they're doing top line revenue growth of 30, 40% a quarter, sometimes 60% a quarter. That's what the top ones are doing, right? You
Wow.
can't find that anywhere else. And with that massive top line growth, the ones that are continually going, now you want to see people that are going from 50 million to 100 million in a few months. And, several of the $500 million revenue companies right now are going to be billion-dollar companies by the end of the year, quite easily. It's that top line growth, it's that operating performance, and then it comes down to valuation, which frankly most of them actually there's cannabis companies are not massively overvalued by any stretch. Some of them are significantly undervalued simply based on the amount of revenue and earnings they're able to generate.
Can you share any names with us?
Sure, absolutely.
Should put on our watch list.
I'll give you a couple of my favorites. One of the top performing big producers is True Leaf out of Florida. They've been Kim Rivers, the CEO, from the very beginning, has been delivering profitability. So that's even in the slogan. They started out focused on the Florida market, didn't get over their skis. Built a dominant position in what will be one of the biggest markets in the U.S. in Florida, and now they're starting to expand to other states. But they've always she's shown remarkable discipline in focusing on taking care of shareholders, right? I think that's the way to. I want companies that take care of shareholders, right? And that actually, it sounds flip, but it's absolutely critical. And a lot of companies that don't know how to do that, and that's not the perspective of a few cannabis companies, several cannabis companies. They looked at it as an opportunity to make themselves rich. But there's the ones that are doing great are the ones that are trying to take care of shareholders as well.
Okay, and how do you identify whether they are doing that?
That's the economic value add. If they're adding value for shareholders, right? That's that framework. That's exactly what that tells me is who's taking care of shareholders by not issuing too much stock and by not over investing, not making bad investments. They have to deploy their capital. That's what a CEO does, right? They invest in infrastructure, they invest in new markets, they invest in the brand, they may invest in R&D. Whoever is the best, whoever's doing a great job of making those investment decisions, those are the companies that tend to perform the best as far as price.
Okay.
Their stock, they get rewarded with a higher stock price. That and another company. So True Leaf is at the very top of the list on that regard. And Jushi Holdings is another one. They're smaller. They've got they act more of the second wave of cannabis companies. They haven't raised way too much capital, or just invested willy nilly. They're a up and coming multi-state operator that's just going absolute gangbusters, and I expect big things from them, over the next 12 months.
Where are they based?
They are, I think they're technically based in Florida, but they operate in Mid-Atlantic, so Pennsylvania, Virginia. Those are some of their biggest markets, but Northeast, a little bit in the Midwest.
And how did you get into? Don't know how to phrase this. Get into cannabis, but sort of how did you? What took you to look at cannabis as an investment?
Yeah, so I don't like to stare at the screen all day, try to pick my spots. I look for large structural moves and, or secular moves, I guess you could say. And, ones you kind of got to stick with and be a little patient, right? And be early.
Yeah,
and with cannabis, they have the advantage there is this massive regulatory arbitrage that was set up because of the federal illegality on the one hand, but states going ahead and saying, no, we're not, we're going to give customers, what they want. Let our vote. Well, it wasn't really the states doing it. It was the individuals doing, for the most part, ballot measures. They're like, hey, we want this to be the law of the land of our state, right? You have this dissonant condition between federal illegality, which, lowers, which increases the risk perception, which kept cannabis stocks from trading, accessing capital markets through the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. They weren't allowed. The exchanges would prohibit them listing on those exchanges simply because it was federally illegal. You have people's perceptions. You have complexities with banking relationships. You have these tax implications that prevent cannabis companies from using all of their expenses to reduce their taxes, right? So their tax bills are much higher than they otherwise would be. So you have all of these things on the one hand that increase the risk profile of cannabis companies. They increases the cost of capital, right? That lack of access to capital is ultimately what it boils down to. So that kept the valuations much lower than they otherwise would be. Then on the other hand, you have all of this phenomenal growth just happening on the revenue side as the market grows. I mean, Michigan just went legal last year, and it went from something like maybe a couple $100 million market to a $1 billion market in a year. That's
Wow.
right in one state. So that's it's seeing that, hey, this is here's a structural arbitrage setup that we can thank the federal government for, and realizing that's where the market is going anyway. You go in there and you set your you figure out who's going to be the best performers, and then wait for that gap to close, which is happening right now.
And besides cannabis, what other sectors do you like to look at?
That is my 100% focus right now. We've got a very large subscriber base. They're all very interested in. I run a newsletter service which focuses entirely on cannabis investing, whether it's looking for private placements or just which stocks to pick or different ways to play the sector. That is, as far as my profession, that's my 100% focus right now.
Let's go back a little bit in time. You did mention that you were working on the institutional financial side of things. Where did you start with your career?
I started on the Chicago Board of Trade. I was just a runner on the Chicago Board of Trade in the bond floor. Right out of college, worked up to the phone deck at bank, and then I was in the 30-year bond option pit. So I managed the order deck and for what's called a filling broker. But anyway, so we were doing 30-year bond options, and so you're one of the guys standing on the rails in one of those jackets doing all the hand signals, if you remember from the old days. That was me. So that was an awesome opportunity to kind of cut my teeth on option valuation, all the levers that you can move in options, all the all the dials that you have to manage risk and trade. So that was awesome. I did that for a while, and then I moved up to the trading desk and was doing institutional sales and trading for all sorts of things. We did index arbitrage. Did that until I went to grad school. Got my MBA, and then went to PIMCO. Ran a fund of hedge funds for a while. There, I focused again on arbitrage, basically fixed income arbitrage type strategies. And then at PIMCO, we were building our inflation-related products. So that's our our commodity investing, our inflation-linked bond investing, and that's where I really got to dig into, what inflation actually is, and that leads to a discussion of what money really is. All of those movements. So yeah, that was, and then after that, that's when I moved to the wealth management side. After several years at PIMCO, then I moved to the wealth management side.
And then you branched out on your own with your own newsletter, right?
Well, it's a team effort on the newsletter side. I don't want to say it's my brainchild. I'm just but I'm the guy that's contributing all the investment ideas.
So is all your time taken up with sort of analyzing, researching, going out to cannabis companies and saying hello and
Yeah,
can I get an idea of what you do?
No, that's exactly it. Because you really got to because it is a very new industry for the most part. The management is key, right? You don't need if you're trading stocks and doing options on stocks. Certainly not worried about the management team at IBM or anything like that, right? But most of that stuff is secondary. But understanding the teams, the quality of the teams, do they have a real brand strategy, or are they just kind of mouthing the words? those are,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
those are the things you got to pay really close attention to, right? It's like evaluating a startup uh,
Yeah.
because they're
Yeah.
publicly traded.
Yeah. And so what sort of prices are they trading at the moment? I'm not quite familiar with the two that you I have heard of Jushi, funnily enough. What sort of prices are they?
Oh, you know what you're looking at for the top performing companies, the biggest, those multiples are getting to be 7 times revenue, 6 to 7 times revenue, that sort of thing. And but that's kind of an overstatement in the sense that the pace at which the revenues are growing. Over the next 12 months, they're kind of at maybe 3 to 4, 5 multiples, but there's still a lot of companies. If you're familiar, cannabis market sold off significantly through the beginning of 2020, and certainly COVID kind of accelerated a lot of that. A lot of companies got caught. Some of them were good operations, but didn't have enough capital, right? And so they're struggling at that
Yep.
point. Other ones, just not really strong players to begin with. And so there's this cleaning up that's going on. But a lot of that, those represent assets that are now trading at 1 to 2 times revenue, right? Come up a
Mm.
little bit with the rally over the last last month or two. But you're looking at very low revenue multiples for a lot of those players as well, and that's the opportunity for those more dominant players.
And are you looking at smaller companies as well, sort of pre-IPO and, looking for opportunities to advise your subscribers on pre-IPO, opportunities
Yes.
really?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We do. I've got five, I think roughly five private placements that we're recommending right now, and we're always on the hunt. We try to do 4 to 6 private placements a year. And mostly they're raising their money through what's called a Reg A financing, which anybody can invest in, but it is still before they go public. So it's a
Yeah.
way for startups to access a broader pool of capital. So yeah, we're looking at companies like that. Some of them have, we've done companies at $5 to $10 million valuations, very small, and a couple at 100 to $200 million valuations, based on their either their intellectual property or the progress that they've made with the capital that they've raised so far. So we're looking at those things, and then of course there's most of the companies trade on the OTC simply because they didn't have any other option, and there's a lot of one company that I was looking at in Florida, right? So you've got Truly, which is this big dominant player, but Liberty Health Sciences was another one that did all the very small company, maybe 100 million, $200 million right now. They were operating splendidly, but the markets just didn't quite acknowledge that. Well, they just got bought out by Air Strategies, which is another much larger company similar to Jushi, and it's another good company. But I think they bought it at like 3 to 4 times revenue, which is great for that. And so the stock popped massively on that. So there's those kind of opportunities are the ones that I'm really looking for right now on the smaller company side. It's which of these small operators that are kind of flying under the radar for one reason or the other. The bigger operators like Jushi and TrueLeave and that either have tremendous amounts of capital, they are absolutely on the hunt right now. They are out there looking for acquisition targets, and so with Liberty Health Sciences, that was one that I expected to be acquired, and they did. And so now there's realizing or trying to figure out who some of those other players are. The ones that aren't. There's a few that are a disaster. Maybe just get
Ah,
and
right.
nobody's going to pay a premium for them. But the ones that are undervalued that a company will pay a premium for, there's a real opportunity there. And then of course that stock gets hitched on to what's a fast growing company anyway, well run as well. So
Yeah.
it just doesn't end.
Where do you hear about this kind of merger possibility?
Oh, well, there are. I'll give you several examples. So several SPACs got you know should I describe what a SPAC is, or do you,
I know, but you're going to explain it better than
yeah.
I can.
Well,
Yeah.
so a SPAC is a special purpose acquisition corporation. They are basically shell companies, but there's several. They're highly regulated. There's a lot of regulations around them, but they raise money. Say they'll raise $100 million, $200 million. I mean, some of them have been like $4 billion, but so they raise raise money through an IPO. So they will sell stock without actually having an operating business. So they raise money by issuing stock to the public, and then they take that money. It sits in trust. They can't use that money until they actually acquire a company. So without, there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. So I don't want to get too far into that. But basically, it's this pool of capital which is and that money can't be just spent to pay salaries for the people that organized the deal. It is sitting there in a trust, waiting for them to announce an acquisition. And so so the advantage is that they've already gone through the IPO process. They've gone public. A company that they acquire, a private company that they acquire, no longer has to go through that filing process, right? They can just get acquired,
Yeah.
and then they're bing bang boom, a publicly traded stock. So it's just there was at the beginning of the year there was roughly $3 billion sitting across 13 SPACs, and most of them looked like they were targeting the cannabis space. Some of them went another direction, but just over the last few months we've had one of the SPACs, Silver Spike, that I recommended, entered into a $1 billion transaction to take over Weed Maps. Another one, did a $500 million deal to kind of pool up for private companies in California. And that was so. There was another big acquisition of, like I said, Air Strategies bought Liberty Health. There's just been all of these, large transactions, at least relative for the cannabis space, that are, kind of cleaning up the space and just creating another source of bid to the market out there.
How do retail traders, for example, get in on that? I mean, is it seems like really inside knowledge. I mean, it's not if it's not there on your typical trader
Right.
platform. So how do traders who are not institutional traders, how do they find out about these
Well,
opportunities?
we have one of our newsletter services looks exactly at, those smaller kind of opportunities, right? Including IPOs. Now, because the cannabis stocks are still not trading on the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, right? There's not going to be these big brokerage firms taking these companies public, right? So they're
Yeah,
all the deals are done in Canada right now. So you have to
yeah,
figure out how to, if you were wanting to own an IPO on the day that it went public, it's really tough, at least for U.S. based investors to get involved in those deals. So what we do is but I don't know that just getting in on an IPO beforehand is necessarily. You really want to see how the market reacts, and so then that's the best way to play it is to see how they go IPO, and of course we're looking at those and we'll recommend them. But it's either you get in on a private raise on a few of these that are doing Reg A offerings, and that's a way to get in early, right?
how do you find out about those? A private raise,
Oh,
for
but
example?
that's what our service is all about. We're looking at them. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
okay,
There's
yeah,
no. I mean, you would technically, if you were just, maybe you could come across a press release, but these are usually not. These deals are not led by investment banks. They are private raises, and you could, there's a place on the SEC website where they have to file them, but that's not really something that an everyday investor is going to be. And that's what we bring to the table is we take a look at all those deals. One of our deals that we just recommended. It's probably the fastest and largest raise ever in one of those, and it was $50 million. They raised $50 million and filled their deal in just couple months. Yeah. So it's that this is not a news feed kind of alert system. This is you got to
yeah.
really dig in
inside knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, I guess from that standpoint, I'm out there talking to all these people, and there's just a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in order to get involved in a private placement normally, and it's twice as true for cannabis stock.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, well, people should, if they're interested in getting in on this, they should sign up to your newsletter pretty quick, I think. Yeah. So, and are you doing this all by yourself, or you have a little team working with
Oh,
you?
we've got a team. We've got an analyst, a few editors. So it's we're a lean shop, but yeah, it's not just me.
And so, how much is it? Is it like a rolling fee per month, or is
Oh,
it a year?
it's
How do you?
annual subscription fee. I mean, they can buy on a lifetime, but if you go to nicinvestors.com, nicinvestors.com, there you can see our publications. You can sign up for a service. We have a free daily e-letter, right? So you can just sign up for that, and from those alerts, you can. It's called Cannabis Profits Daily, but it's all on the Nic Investors site. And you go to nicinvestors.com, and you can sign up, and then you can find out about all our other products.
I'll be looking at that. It sounds very interesting. Certainly, big development, isn't it? I mean, there aren't many sectors that are poised to explode quite the same way. I mean, of course, tech is still, pushing the limits of the Nasdaq, and probably will for some time to come. But this sounds like it's going to go up at a faster rate, really,
Well, it's
because of the legal developments you're referring to.
yeah, no, it's so I think apart from the groundwork that's been laid over the last 2-3 years by these companies, right? So some of them are in 20 something states, right? And a few of them are, a little more targeted in some of the bigger states like Michigan, Illinois, California, New Jersey is a new state that just came along. But the big development is in the prospect now for making cannabis federally legal. The MORE Act was an act that which deschedules cannabis and does lots of other things too. But it deschedules cannabis, which means it's no longer a controlled substance. That bill was co-sponsored by Kamala Harris. She now our vice president, right? So it passed the House. Now it's just a matter of it getting onto the Senate. And with the Democrats in control and it being a bill that Kamala Harris signed, I think it'll be on the agenda, right? Mitch McConnell before blocked all cannabis legalization. It was really him. It wasn't the Republican Party. It was really him. And so now you just have a tremendous amount of incentive or likelihood that that's going to get passed, I think could be within weeks.
Your fingers hovering on the button, I guess.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, you don't want to wait till after that. You don't want to read it in the news, right? You want to be there first.
Yeah.
And I think that the amount of patience that's going to be required is a lot less than it was 2 years ago. Once it gets descheduled, that whole window that I talked about shuts very quickly. That arbitrage window, that structural arbitrage trade. Because oh my gosh, now you can bank, states don't have to make it legal; they have to actually do something to make it illegal, right? So you have the whole state, almost the whole country, right there. Now, of course, there's a lot of blocking and tackling and bureaucratic stuff that's going to happen, but it makes that those become just things that are
minor annoyances,
to go where you're ultimately going to get, and the market will price it in a lot sooner than the bureaucrats learn to deal with it. That's for sure.
Yeah. But for COVID, would you be possibly out there this month meeting, or at least scheduling to meet people, go out to these companies?
Yeah. So, I have several interviews and conversations every month. Most of them are over Zoom. And so it's talking to the CEO, some of the founders, and we're actively out there talking to them all the time. Plus, keeping a close eye on the numbers as they come in and seeing who's really making some big improvements.
Yeah, cool. Well, Don, I think we're going to finish there. It's interesting stuff, and people should look up your newsletter online if they're interested in cannabis stocks. If they're interested in stocks, period, I think that's a really good tip. Good. Okay. Well, thanks very much, and wish you all the best for 21.
All right, Nick. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the chance talking to you.
I was talking just now to Don Yocham, Head of Private Ventures at the National Institute for Cannabis Investors. Just before you go, if you're a regular here and enjoy the podcast, please check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/HenrichsPodcasts. Thanks very much.